Welcome to today's In Conversations on India's new drone policy and the broader issues around the use of drones. I don't need to emphasize as to how unmanned aircraft systems, or drones as they are popularly called, are rapidly changing the pace of both warfare, but also has a much wider impact in civil society. There is no doubt that this technology will continue to evolve rapidly, and drones are going to play a far more important role in all aspects of our lives. But in terms of rules and regulations, these have to evolve on a continual basis because of their impact in the civil sector, but also how we are looking at this new ways of using this technology in conflict. In recent times, one has seen dramatic use of drone technology, be it the attack on the Saudi oil facility in 2019, or even in the recent Azerbaijan Armenian conflict. And of course, India has invested quite a bit in this. Investments are continuing to grow. So, having updated rules is so critical. To discuss all of these issues, I'm pleased to invite Mr. Rajan Luthra, who heads special projects in the chairman's office at Reliance Industries Limited. He is a member of FICCI's National Executive Council and currently chairs the National FICCI Committee on Drones, driving industry academia collaboration aligned with the government's vision for making India a drone manufacturing hub. As a co-chair of FICCI Homeland Security Committee for 3 years, he steered the smart border management, counter drone, predictive policing, and cybercrime management initiatives. We couldn't have gotten a better person to discuss all of these issues around drones today. So let's start with the most recent development, sir. Drone Rules 2021. What are your initial thoughts on that? There appears to be clearly a much more liberalized approach towards drones use than previously policy iterations. Maybe we can take a quick scan on the new policy, take us through some of the policy changes that have come about from your perspective, and how significant is this policy change, and maybe even explain to us the relaxation that have been brought about in this new rules in a sense. How do you look at them? The challenge is, of course, always to find the right balance between too much regulations and no regulations. So let me get your response on that, please.
Good afternoon, Raji. It's a pleasure to be here with you and discussing a very important topic on a very important time frame. Uh, Drone, we all know, is a transformative technology that many have compared with the internet and GPS as a key enabling technology. Uh, the rules that are required for making this technology being available to all have been going through a bit of let's say, a rapid set of changes in the past few years. There was a time when the rules did not permit any commercial entity to use drones at all. Then they were partially permitted. And more recently, in March, it became a little too bureaucratic in terms of the way the rules were framed to take care of many of the potential threats or risks from drones. What has happened now is that the government almost, let's say, in a matter of a few months, based on industry feedback, based on feedback from the academia, almost all stakeholders, including the end users, has taken a very industry friendly and a very positive response to the feedback. I believe this is the only rule that has been repealed in a matter of 5 months, and what has come out is a very welcome step. 25th August 2021, I would call it as a milestone and a landmark day in India's history because of the new regulations. They are liberalized. In fact, you hit the right term over there, that the balancing that has now been done has been extremely solid. They are making it available to all, making sure that the power of the technology is available. Yet they have taken care of some of the concerns from the rogue drones, which in any case is a menace that has to be dealt independently as well.
Absolutely. So I think you touched upon the point of saying this drones. How transformative do you think drones really are, and how do you assess the impact of drones in the Indian context? And also tell us something about the size of the Indian drone market. How large is the drone market, and what do you see as the growth trajectory in terms of India?
Last year, I had the opportunity to participate in an event which was uh, I moderated a panel discussion between the Surveyor General of India and the Joint Secretary, Ministry of Civil Aviation, and we spoke about the Swamitwa scheme that was launched last year. And I would use this example to illustrate the point or the power of transformation that one simple technology can cause. The Swamitwa scheme, which is to survey the village Abadi areas using uh, drones for aerial mapping. That scheme was announced a few weeks before that, and today, let's say less than 2 years or maybe 1.5 years later, you had more than 50,000 villages which have already been mapped out. You have more than 770,000 families in rural areas who have finally got their property cards. And these property cards are now going to enable them to get finance, to get access to, let's say, multiple other opportunities which were not available to them in the past. Now, that means that close to 2 million plus people, if maybe even more than that, in less than a year of the actual start of the program, have benefited from uh, a very well-intentioned scheme and a very well thought out scheme, but it's also being executed very well because of drones. Now, that is just one example of the power of drones in the social area. The power of defense we've already spoken about. We've all seen what has been happening while drones have been around in the defense sector for multiple decades. But more recently, all the people in the strategic armed forces at the think tank level, at the people who define the doctrines, they've realized that this is something that has to be now incorporated into the future war plans. If we now come from the social to the defense to maybe the commercial area. The commercial area, to be honest, there is not one sector that will not get impacted by drones. We have seen multiple reports. We ourselves have done multiple assessments that in the commercial sector, you have across more than 20 plus sectors, from infrastructure to telecom to supply chain to healthcare to a wide variety of industries will stand to benefit with the power of drones. Uh, in terms of the estimation of the market size, last year in September, the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, realizing the power of this sector, had asked us to form a working group for the drone sector. It was a very interesting challenge to have a diverse set of end users, people from the armed forces, people from the industry, and both small startups and large industry, the academia, along with EY as our knowledge partner, which we had onboarded at that stage. And we did a ground up market study at Wiki. Uh, Based on this bottom up assessment of the cumulative market potential, we were able to try and assess the objective was to try and assess the manufacturing potential. So we obviously left out the services, we left out the consumer drones, we left out some of the, let's say, upcoming sectors like the air taxis, which are not very clear right now. So the cumulative market potential that we were able to establish was about 300,000 crores, or about $40 billion in the next 8 to 10 years. And out of that, we assume that India has the potential to convert almost 60% of indigenization in that opportunity, thereby giving us almost 180,000 crores of manufacturing potential alone for drones in India. That is a huge number. It will need a whole lot of stakeholders to come together. But the drone policy, once again, is now finally enabling that manufacturing potential to be established. And it's really a step which has finally, in my view, created the launch pad for the launch of this sector.
Terrific. I think it's clear that the major militaries around the world are using drones in military conflicts. Obviously, we are buying a number of drones for a number of years, actually, from the US, Israel, and we have a number of unmanned platforms within India as well. But when you look at the overall, where do you see the Indian armed forces in terms of integrating drones? Are they well integrated already into the armed forces and the strategic thinking, strategic plans of the country? And where do we go from here in terms of the Indian military's use of drones?
We all are aware that some of the global forces have been using drones for maybe 40, 50 years. In India, I think the Kargil War was the first time that we formally utilized drones for some of the missions that were undertaken at that stage. And in the last 20 years, there has now been a very extensive induction of multiple types of drones within the armed forces across all the three forces. In fact, they are even as of now evaluating even further integration of these, let's say, the medium altitude long endurance or the high altitude long endurance drones. And I think all those capabilities which the drones provide to the armed forces, whether it is, let's say, a strategic surveillance capability or the maritime domain awareness, or even, let's say, the counter or an active response in a directed manner. These are all being evaluated, and I'm sure the armed forces are in active consideration. There have been some recent reports of even more drones being imported, a lot of manufacturing that is starting in India. And I think going forward, even some of these startups have started offering their solutions in the smaller segment as well. So today you have the Indian Armed Forces even using locally manufactured drones for multiple missions across the length and breadth of the country.
Terrific. And I want to take on the question about the manufacturing, because India's current plans are also in terms of making India a manufacturing hub. So, like I said, we have been so far buying a lot of drones from some of the best in the world. But in terms of the overall competency, how far behind are we from the US, China, or Israel in terms of innovation and R&D for drones? Because look at the case of China, its journey has been quite impressive. From someone who used to import drones, China today has become a manufacturing hub and also an exporter of drones, including the armed ones. So, where do you put India in the overall ladder in terms of the innovation, R&D, and the whole ecosystem for the drone capacity build up in the country?
No, excellent, Rajiv, because this, I think, is the main mission behind the vision of the government to make India a drone hub of the world. And I think it has three facets, if I can maybe break it up a little. The first facet is at the innovation level itself, right? So the getting the academic level or getting the R&D to be initiated, so that you can have the intellectual property being in your control. The second is more of the manufacturing capability itself, and third is around the operationalizing the drones and the end use of drones. So if we compare, let's say, the countries that you mentioned, whether it's China or US or even Israel, and even some of the European countries like Switzerland, for example, we are not far behind. We are effectively very much there in terms of these smaller drones, right from the innovation to manufacturing and the use. For some of the larger drones today, companies have started tying up and partnering with global players, and that manufacturing is also starting to happen. And finally, at the end user level, I think the demand will really come from the opening up of the drone sector now with the new rules. Once
Okay.
the demand is there, that is when we will also become more competitive, because today there is no volume for, let's say, the demand, or demand is simply not present in the volumes that the component manufacturers require. So today, almost all the components are imported. You now need to and we are starting to do that, trying to get not only the drone manufacturers or the service providers, but even the the component manufacturers to get excited about this sector.
Okay, no, that's terrific. But I also want to ask for some of the there are some pitfalls in a sense in terms of how drones are being used. So we saw supposedly a drone attack at the Indian Air Force station in Jammu a few weeks ago. That of course brings the whole question of rogue drones and the possibility of a swarm of drones that happen. So how is India preparing itself to overcome the whole question, the menace of rogue drones in the coming years? Because I think, especially in our neighborhood, both on our east and west, we could have this potential problem coming from. We have seen this playing out to some extent already. So, what are the Indian policy measures, policy thinking in this regard to address the whole question of rogue drones?
The menace of rogue drones has been around for many years now. And there again, we have the concerns which were largely driving uh, the lack of opening up of the policy around in the sector. Despite the Jammu attack, the new rules were still, firstly, the draft rules had been published, and then within a 40-day period, the final rules were notified. And these were approved at the topmost levels in the country, and the Prime Minister personally tweeted about it. The Minister for Civil Aviation actually had a press conference articulating some of the benefits of the new rules. I think so. We have to deal both of them on a parallel basis. The rogue drone menace can be addressed in three broad ways, and partially it has already started to be addressed. First is the capability of dividing the country sensitive installations into red zones, which you will not allow the drones to fly. You will have a no permission, no takeoff policy, which will make sure that none of the authorized drones venture into the red zones without permission, or even the yellow zones. They will have to take permission. The second is uh, the proposal to bring about remote identification and tracking of each and every authorized drones. That will, in fact, account for a very large threat which is posed from the drones which were imported, a large number of them illegally. By some counts, they are even as many as 600,000 drones in the country, which each any one of them could be misused. So there is a framework being announced shortly about getting each and every drone being required to be tracked in real time with an identification, which will take care of, let's say, making sure every drone is accounted for. And if you have a drone flying without any identity around it, then you will know it's likely to be a malicious drone. The third is the counter drone systems itself. Out of the 300,000 crores that I mentioned about, almost 15% of that market potential is actually for the counter drone systems. And DRDO and many of the other Indian companies are doing indigenous development. A lot of the global players are also interested in that opportunity. And I think on a case-to-case basis, both in the defense forces, in the government sector, even in the private sector, whether it's the airports or even some of the other sensitive installations, each one of them will have to do their security risk assessment, prepare their concept of operations, and the technology is available today to detect and counter the rogue drones or interdict them, both in soft kill and hard kill measures. It will take some amount of financing and budgeting for those threats, but that is like any other threat. Right? It's same thing if you had a car laden with explosives coming at your gate,
Yeah.
and now you're dealing with an aerial threat. So I think it's something which is being thought through in full detail, and I'm sure we will be able to find the right solutions for that.
Terrific. So I think just brings me to one of the last questions that I want to ask you. In terms of course, the delivery, I think especially in the COVID-19 pandemic context, there has been a lot of talk about delivery of medicines and other goods using drones. In fact, several years ago, this has been done, experimented in the US. Several years ago, Amazon and the UK where was dropping packages and so on and so forth. Uh, where is India in terms of getting to that sort of a more sophisticated level of using drones in terms of civil on the civil sector, delivery of medicines and other essential goods and so on and so forth? Is Indian policy thinking as well as the technological developments along those lines? And where do you how what's the time frame that you kind of foresee in a sense?
Healthcare is a very important sector, especially in the current circumstances that we are going through. And I think delivery of healthcare services, especially in the remote parts of the country, is an extremely important task. While we are now delivering 10 million vaccinations every day, as of yesterday, at the same time, a large part of the country continues to be deprived from access to, let's say, vaccines, access to other medicines, especially in emergencies. Uh, Telangana government is one such entity which has already taken an initiative. It has been given the exemption against the previous policy uh, to conduct a pilot called Medicine from the Sky, which is being partnered with by World Economic Forum. And we are working there as well to try and support the experimentation, the delivery of medicines in a safe manner from point A to point B. And I think part of that is also covered in the drone policy now, which provides for the experimentation around drone corridors, uh, which can be used for supply chain, but it could also be used for, let's say, uh, we just yesterday heard about a pilot being planned even by some of the premier institutes in the country using drones. So it's a very, very important sector. It has a lot of social impact, especially in the areas that is needed. And I am very hopeful and optimistic that in the very near future, you will start seeing the not only the piloting of these use cases, but an extensive deployment as well. I think what we really need to figure out is how to make it cost effective to deploy these technologies and yet make an impact.
Thank you, Mr. Rajan Luthra. I think this has been a terrific, very rich conversation. Thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us. And of course, this is an area that we will continue to look at, because the spread of RPA technologies, or the unmanned aerial vehicle technology, it brings in both benefits, and there are negative implications as well. It's a problem because the possible diffusion of capabilities amongst our adversaries, especially in the southern Asian neighborhood, which is pretty. It's pretty obvious that I think we have serious problems in a sense. So I think there are going to be constant conversations, constant and policy evolution in a sense, to make sure that we stay one step ahead in terms of our policy and regulations. So I'm sure we will come back to you again for another policy conversation sooner than later. Thank you so much for spending this time with us and sharing your insights on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.